Hey, Margie here. Today we're delving into bone turnover markers because this is something a lot of us don't even know about. Yet it's a test that can give us so much information and really can have a positive impact on our treatment when it comes to figuring out what's going on with our bones. And I'm really excited about our special guest, Dr. R. Keith McCormick. And Dr. McCormick is a chiropractic physician specializing in the management of patients with osteoporosis. He is the author of Great Bones, Taking Care of Your Osteoporosis, which recently came out and is just such a fabulous book, as well as the whole body approach to osteoporosis. Sports have always played a vital part in Dr. McCormick's life. He is the former U.S. record holder for the most points scored in pentathlon competition. Dr. McCormick continues to compete in triathlons of all distances and has completed 6 Ironman competitions, 5 of them after recovering from multiple osteoporosis fractures. So he is so inspirational and such a wealth of knowledge. And we really go over in detail the bone turnover markers so you'll understand how you can use them. So lots of great information. Stay tuned. Welcome, Dr. McCormick. I am so happy to have you on the podcast. Your talk was really instrumental in changing lives in the summit, and so many questions came up, and I'm just really thrilled to have you back. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me, Margie.
Okay, so we're going to talk about bone markers, and actually, what I do want to say is your book. I just want to thank you for this amazing, amazing book. This has been like my Bible. It's not a book you read on the beach or anything. But whenever I have a question, I just go to it and it's been really incredible. I'm so amazed how much information and even the references are just incredible. So I have to thank you because it's a phenomenal book. I just love it. So let's talk about bone markers because on the summit, your talk was all about testing, and we did discuss bone markers, but I want to even do a deeper dive today because people are utilizing this information and oftentimes their doctor doesn't really know what to do with it. So let's just start from the very beginning. And because not everybody did hear your talk on the summit, but let's just talk about what bone markers are.
Well, there's two categories of what's called bone turnover markers. There's bone resorption markers and there's bone formation markers. And the combination are called bone turnover markers. So we're looking at the turnover of bone, the bone remodeling. So the bone, as bone is resorbed by the osteoclasts, then we can use bone resorption markers to assess osteoclastic activity. So the bone resorption markers, essentially there's 3 of them. There's um, there's DPD, which is a little bit old school technology. It's called deoxypyridinoline. There's NTX and there's CTX. And NTX is N-telopeptide and there's C-telopeptide. And if you took um, a piece of bone collagen, and that's the basis of bone. Bone is collagen impregnated with minerals. But if you took a piece of bone collagen, it would be a long, spirally triple helix molecule. And at each end of it, you have an N terminal and you have a C terminal. That's your C telopeptide and your N telopeptide. So as the osteoclasts are breaking down bone during the remodeling process, they break down the collagen and they spit out, they cleave off the N terminal and C terminal and spit it out. And then that goes in your blood and then into your urine and you pee it out. So that's what we're measuring. So it's a measure of osteoclastic activity. So so like I said, the DPD is a little bit old school. I don't use that. That the NTX can be done either through urine or through your blood. So and it can be done in what's called a spot urine. So it's a one void urine, which isn't very accurate, but that you can do that. It's a one void urine NTX. Then there's a 24-hour urine NTX, which is a little bit better, but still not great. And then there's the serum NTX, which is pretty good. And then a lot of doctors use the serum NTX. I don't, but I can work with it. And then cetalopeptide is the best. And let me just say right now, since we're on those, it's really important when you're getting the lab tests done that you do them fasting, nothing to eat after 8 o'clock the night before the blood draw, that you go to the lab first thing in the morning, and that you stop all supplemental biotin and collagen before the blood draw. So those are your three bone resorption markers. And then there's the bone formation markers, and there's essentially three of them also, and that is bone-specific alkaline phosphatase, osteocalcin, and what's called P1NP or procollagen type 1 N-terminal propeptide. So P1NP is the best. That's the one I use most often. Osteocalcin is a little squirrely to work with and it's just two variables, so I don't really use it. And the bone specific alkaline phosphatase, it's a good one to use if you're if you're monitoring, like if a person has um, osteoporosis and their doctors prescribe them a bisphosphonate, and you want to monitor and make sure they're not, um, or either a bisphosphonate or Prolia, that making sure that they're not over suppressing the osteoclast. Looking at that bone specific alkaline phosphatase is a good way to monitor that. But they're your two forms of bone turnover markers.
Okay, so tell us, because you really believe, person gets a DEXA, and typically, people get the bone density, and the majority of physicians will decide right then and there, just based on the DEXA, what to do next. So why don't you shed light on how this is just so incredibly helpful in figuring out treatment and what's going on?
Well, there's reasons why people have low bone density. They can either have high osteoclastic activity or low osteoblastic activity, or a combination of the two, or maybe they have low osteoclastic activity and low osteoblastic activity, which is called low bone turnover osteoporosis. And that's very, very different than high bone turnover osteoporosis, where you have osteoclastic activity that's out the wazoo. They're just breaking down tons and tons of bone, and their osteoblasts aren't keeping up with them, with the osteoclast. So the overall net effect is loss of bone. Well, it's two totally different situations: high bone turnover osteoporosis, low bone turnover osteoporosis. And the different medications that are available for bone health, for treating osteoporosis, are very different. So a bisphosphonate, Actonel, Fosamax, Beniva, Reclass, those bisphosphonates work by killing off, or at least poisoning, the osteoclast, decreasing their osteoclastic activity. Well, if a person has low bone turnover osteoporosis already, then that doesn't seem like the way to go. Well, if you don't do bone turnover markers, then you won't know that. So just by looking at a person's bone density isn't enough. You have to look at their turnover markers and see what's going on. If like and it- the if a b- like a Forteo or Timlos, they're the parathyroid analogs. They stimulate those osteoblasts to build bone. So sometimes, especially if the osteoblastic activity is pretty low, those might be a better choice. And especially if the osteoclastic activity is also low. So you can choose medications to fit the bill, to fit what is going on with that patient.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, the DEXA test, sometimes they don't do every 2 years.
Yep.
And so if someone is put on a medicine or a treatment, even any kind of treatment, you have to wait a long time where these when do you how typically, how soon will you do a repeat test to see if something's working?
Well, and that's exactly just what you said. That's why you do these repeatedly. You not only want to make sure that that medication, or even if it's not a medication that you're using, even if it's just, improving a person's diet, improving their protein intake, improving their body pH, doing all those things, you can also see a change in bone turnover markers. So when I talk about therapy, I don't just mean medications. I'm talking about, a natural approach or pharmaceuticals. But in any case, whatever you're doing therapeutically, You want to make sure that that's working. I don't want to wait 2 years to find out if a person's bone density is better and say, oh, yeah, it worked, or oh, no, it didn't work. And by looking at bone turnover markers, you can assess to see what your therapy is doing. And if you're talking about the pharmaceuticals, 5% of the time they don't work. So it would be terrible to have a person taking Forteo, one of the parathyroid analogs, where they're injecting themselves every day for 2 years, and then find out 2 years later it didn't work. Well, that's crazy. So let's get a baseline bone, CTX, a baseline P1NP, 3 months into the medication, do it again, and make sure that there's a change. Then you know that the medication's working.
Right. So ideally, you'd want before you do any type of
Before and
treatment,
after, right? Yeah.
figure out what's going on and after. And I know
Always
people
baseline. Yeah.
And I know people wrote in into they wrote in actually, people asked questions after your talk and they said, "Well, I'm already on something or I never got a baseline and I'm already taking a medication or something like that." And your answer was it's still better to see what's going on regardless.
No, that's a problem. A lot of doctors don't get baselines, but even if they didn't, let's get it now and see where they're at, because even getting it now, 6 months into a drug, maybe that drug then becomes less effective later on. And Forteo and Timlos are good examples of that. The longer you're on them, the less effective they are. And you can see that in a bone turnover marker.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it makes so much sense. Someone gets a DEXA, you have no idea. Did they not develop bone when they were younger? Are they actively losing bone? It really is gonna make such a difference regardless of what they do to understand the root cause, besides all the other testing that you do. But this is just so important. So let's go through because a lot of people asked about numbers. They well, first of all, why do you think doctors aren't ordering this? It just makes so much sense.
I think the reason why is because there's become a culture of a negative attitude towards resorption markers because they were never done properly. As I said earlier, you have to do it fasting. You have to do it first thing in the morning. You have to stop biotin and collagen beforehand. And a lot of times doctors don't tell their patients that. And so then the patient eats their breakfast one time and then goes to the lab and gets the test. The next time they don't. One time they go at 10 o'clock, another time they go at 7 o'clock, another time they go at 3 in the afternoon. Well, the markers are all over the place. The results are all over the place. It's not going to be consistent. They're not going to be accurate. And so doctors, I think they lost their confidence in them. But if they're done properly, they come back pretty good. They're not
You know,
perfect, but their bone densities aren't perfect either. None of these tests are perfect, but the more we do them properly, the more accurate things will be.
It's funny, that's exactly what happened to someone who's in my community who listened to the summit and said to her doctor, "I wanna have I wanna do the bone turnover markers and the CTX," and she knew exactly because she had listened and to ask her doctor. And, doctor agreed, but says, they're not so accurate because some people do it in the morning, just like what you said, but instead of saying, well, you have to do it this way. So it's so interesting. But now she got the scores and the doctor doesn't really understand how to interpret it. So I think, and I've got numerous questions. This person's on Australia. What do the numbers mean? So if you could just share with us, because you've been doing this for such a long time and you see the value and you truly understand the numbers. So and I know it's a little different in some of the different labs, but if you can give us the basics so that when people get this, and I know you have things in your book too. This, as I said to everybody, this book is just such an amazing. I mean, I'm just so grateful for you for doing it because I just think you're going to change the trajectory of osteoporosis with this.
I
But
hope.
yeah, and I just hope a lot of physicians utilize the book. I hope they use it as a resource as well because it can give them so much information. All right, so let's go back to our numbers.
Well, first thing I want to say is if you use Quest, stay with Quest. If you use LabCorp, stay with LabCorp because these companies use different assay technology. And there's going to be a 50%, a 50-point difference between Quest and LabCorp oftentimes. So not only are they squirrely markers if you don't do them properly, but now if you do Quest one day and LabCorp next day, now they're going to be really off. So stay with the lab that you use and be consistent with that. Um, as far as the numbers are concerned, I've always read, uh, that all these things really matter. But it wasn't until about a year ago that I went to, and maybe I even said this in the summit, but I'll tell the story again. This because it's just 9 months or a year ago. I went to my physician for something totally different, and she said, "Hey, Keith, do you want to do any other labs?" And I go, "Sure," because I get my CTX by myself. I pay for it. I just go do it myself,
And so
and
wait, one question, how much is it approximately? Do you know?
Well, for me to get a CTX is about 110 through LabCorp and 125 or so through Quest, 130, something like that. I can't remember,
So
but
it's not that expensive
no,
of a
not that
test.
expensive. No. And but she said, "Hey, Keith, do you want any other labs done?" I said, "Sure," because I was seeing her at 11:30 in the morning. I'd eaten breakfast, so but I said, "Sure, throw in a CTX onto my lab work." So I went down to the lab right then at 11:30, and I did my CTX. Now, most of the time, my CTX is 375, 400, something like that. It came back 100. Actually, it was 99, I think. It was like, it was totally different because I'd eaten breakfast. Usually I go at 7 or 8 in the morning. This was done at 11:30 or 12. And so instead of being a 375, I was a 100, like dramatic. And like, it floored me because I'd always read how important this was, but I'd never seen it so black and white than when I did it myself.
Wow, no, you didn't tell that story. That's very interesting. Whoa.
So, numbers.
Yes.
For the cetulopeptide, uh, my sweet spot is about 350. So anywhere between 300 and 400 is great. If you're over 350, 400, you're probably losing bone. Do I have patients who are 450 that don't seem to be losing bone? Yes. But typically, you're 450 or higher, 425 higher, you're probably losing bone.
Dr. McCormick, so what units are we gonna see when we look at the CTX, when we see the values?
Typically, you see CTX of 300, 400, 500, and it's usually picograms or PG per ml. But then sometimes it's also under nanograms per liter, but it's the same thing. So
Okay, great.
if a person has 250 for a CTX, that's fine. If they have a 200, that's getting a little low. Certainly 50 is too low. And a lot of times when people are on Prolia, it gets below 50, which I think is not good. And the reason why is because the the more a person responds to Prolia, the better the response to Prolia, the more chance that they will have a worse rebound. And we talked a little bit about that in the summit on the rebound from Prolia, that if a person stops Prolia, so Prolia is the injection every 6 months. It's called a rankle inhibitor or RENKL inhibitor. And when it wears off after 6 months, then their bone osteoclast activity rises, your CTX will jump up really high. And the lower it is, the better the response to Prolia, the lower that CTX is, bigger the rebound, the resorption those osteoclasts are going to do. So when I see somebody with a really great response, they're excited, but I get worried about.
I have a case that someone had written in that I wanna ask you about Proly. I don't know if we wanna do that now, or do you wanna should we continue? I guess we'll wait on that. And
Is
what about because the person who had written to me also had a urine. The urine,
you're an NTX?
it's interesting because she said her blood CTX, we'll talk about this later, was 136, but the urine was 72 nanomoles per BCE?
That was urine and that was NTX.
Oh, okay.
But you
Okay.
has to have that nanomoles per BCE or whatever that is, because that's how you know that there should be 3 numbers. There's the N-telepeptide, just the main number of how much NTX is found in the urine. Then there's the creatinine, and then there's the one where they take the NTX creatinine ratio. And that's
Okay.
the number that really matters. And
Okay.
that's what she found was a 72 or whatever. So
Yeah.
so that's high. So an NTX urine of 72 is too high. It should be down below 40. Anything above 45, 50, you're losing bone, probably for the
And
NTX.
interesting because her blood CTX was a 136.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm saying. Either she did that CTX wrong, like she ate or was later in the morning or something like that, because it's going to go down. The CTX is the highest at 3 in the morning, and then gets lowest like 3 in the afternoon. So
So
maybe she did it wrong. She ate something like that, or maybe that NTX is wrong. And if that NTX was a spot NTX, a one void NTX, that's probably the problem.
oh, and we'll go over because this is a person
Ah,
who is on Prolia, this
but for sure, they
person.
don't match. The 130 CTX and the 72 NTX do not match.
Oh, interesting. Hmm,
So something is off there.
something is off there. Wow, so she'll need to repeat one of
One,
those, probably the CTX since you think that's the most accurate.
so let me talk a little about the P1NP.
Yeah, let's go to the P1NP.
So
Wait,
uh,
actually, before you go there, so if it's too low, just explain what that means. If your number's too low, what
these
is that telling us?
you need some osteoclastic activity to get some bone remodeling going on so you can call out some of the microfractures that are happening. If you kill off all the osteoclasts, you get no osteoclastic activity, your bones become dead. They're not alive anymore. They're not remodeling. They're not getting rid of microfractures. So, and that's exactly how bones become more brittle, older, with time instead of remodeling. So too low of CTX isn't good either.
And I think it's interesting because just looking at the DEXA, if it's a low number and they put someone on Fosamax, right, and their CTX was too low,
That's not good.
that's
Right. Yeah.
yeah, could be such a problem. Okay, so that
So I've tried really hard to look, everybody that comes into me, and if I have a CTX and a P1NP, I write them down. And I look to see kind of how they relate to each other. And it's usually about, 10 to 1, 9.5 to 1 as far as the CTX and the P1NP. So if a person has a 600 for as a CTX, their P1NP is usually around 60 or 65 if they're healthy. If they're not healthy, then that P1NP might be a lot lower. They might have a 600 CTX, which is a little too high, but boy, if they have a 40 on the P1NP, which is too low, then that's a bad situation. So if they have a 60 CTX and they have a 65, 70 P1NP, that's a better situation than if they have a 30 P1NP. So it means that, if that P1NP is too low, those osteoblasts just are not responding. They're not keeping up with the osteoclasts.
okay, so you need to look at everything together in terms of figuring out what your treatment would be.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and like I said, always get these, especially if you're doing an anabolic drug, Forteo, Timlos, Evenity, maybe Prolia, always get a P1NP beforehand. And then 3 months into the medication, a P1NP again to make sure it's working. If a person's just going to do a bisphosphonate, it's not as important to get a P1NP because our check 3 months into a bisphosphonate isn't going to be P1NP, it's going to be CTX because the CTX monitors the osteoclasts And what are we doing with a bisphosphonate? We're attacking the osteoclast. So we're trying to make sure that we're looking at baseline osteoclastic activity and then what happens 3 months after you've started a medication that is attacking those osteoclasts. If you go to the anabolics, we're trying to stimulate the osteoblasts and that the bone formation markers, the bone formation cells. So that's why you get a pre-treatment P1NP, and then 3 months into it, you get another P1NP to make sure the osteoblasts are being stimulated.
So let's talk about the people who have different root causes, and many of the root causes with inflammation or increasing osteoclast activity. So those people who are going to work on the root cause, they're not going to go on a medication. How soon would you then do another, do another CTX in that situation?
Well, on those people, I'd be looking at oxidative stress markers too, So,
Right.
so you're not just going to look at that CTX and P1NP. And I would wait maybe 5 months into or 6 months into it because it takes a lot longer to affect the whole body without a drug than it does when you just using nutrition. It takes much longer to change things. But you need to look at other biomarkers too. So you look at oxidative stress biomarkers, um, like lipid peroxides, 8-OH2DG, look at your red blood cell count, look at it. Maybe they have a gut issue. So you've done like a GI map or GI effects from Genova or the GI map from Diagnostic Solutions. You know, if you're trying to change gut health, you might want to redo that but you're looking at other markers, homocysteine, C-reactive protein, all these different lab tests. That's what you're doing. You're doing all these labs looking for things that are off. And what I mentioned before is the therapeutic targets. That's your therapeutic target of, okay, they have high lipids. They have high low density lipoproteins. They have high cholesterol. Those two things stimulate PPAR gamma, which stimulates the osteoclasts. So we know that if we bring down the LDL, if we bring down their cholesterol, uh, if we bring down the C-reactive protein, that's going to affect the CTX. So, but we do all four then of those markers or something. But we're looking for changes in a lot of different markers.
Yeah, and it's just so I think this testing's so important because otherwise you're in the dark.
Totally
Y
guessing. And I'm not a guess person. I like to know that what I'm doing is working. Um, yeah. So I'm a big tester. So.
Yeah, no, but you've had such great results and people have gotten better, and well, you know what? Not everyone's heard your
Right.
story. Why don't you just briefly tell everybody where you came from? Because I think for people listening, it's just so unbelievable. You wanna just quickly, for those who hadn't heard about your story, where you came from?
Well, when I was 45, well, number one, I've been an athlete all my life. I trained really hard. I was on the Olympic team. Um, been on a lot of world championship teams. I did a sport called modern pentathlon where I was on the Olympic team. And I did triathlons. I've done a lot of Ironmans and shorter triathlons. So I've just been an athlete since I was 5 years old. And so it's just a big part of my life. And then I started breaking when I was 45. I broke a lot of bones and found out I had severe osteoporosis. And I went to 5 endocrinologists, and everybody just wanted to throw me on a drug and didn't seem to make sense to me. And it's like, wait a minute, I'm 45 and I'm going to live hopefully to 90 or so. So I'm going to be on drugs till 45 years. And they said yes. And I go, wow, that seems a little not right about that. Don't you even want to figure out why I have osteoporosis? But they didn't, and they ruled out a few things, and that's all they wanted to do, and it didn't make sense to me. So anyhow, I just immersed myself. I mean, I guess I'm a very, and that's why I was on the Olympic team. I'm able to totally immerse myself into something. If you tell me to train for the world championships for tiddlywinks, I will train all day long for tiddlywinks world championships. And so I can do that. And so I just totally immersed myself in the study of bone health. And that's why I've written 2 books in it now because, I just love what I do. So anyhow, so yeah, I changed things around and now I can do Ironmans. I'm scheduled for a half Ironman on June 11th, a marathon June 17th, 6 days later, full Ironman in September, a few other races this summer. So, yeah,
Oh, that's great, and we have another podcast that you did all about medications and all about how you mix things up, and that and you've been off medication for a long time now, and so that we'll give the link to that other podcast that goes into that, but it's such a wonderful story, and obviously you really get into things because how many references do you have in this book?
1,200 references.
Yeah, so you
We-
really delve deep, but you know what? We need this. We need this information because the good news is there's so much that can be done when we know what we're dealing with and we figure out the root causes.
And I
So,
want people to understand osteoporosis. I want them to understand the background of this so that they can have a better conversation with their physician. And, you know, I, there's just too much uh, superficial information on the internet and not enough deepness. And my book is certainly deep, a little too deep at times, um, but I didn't want to tread lightly on the subject.
well, I think what's so good about this is that if any physician, you go through the testing, you go through everything in detail. So it's just a great reference to really clarify the root causes, the testing, all issues that could occur with the deck. So it's just really, really a wonderful. I've been recommending it to everybody because it's just so fabulous.
I
All
think
right.
the neat thing about the book is you can read it, but also you can just use it as a reference. So when a person goes into their doctor and their doctor orders a CBC, a CMP, a vitamin D, they can take those results, go home, look up those tests in the book, and now they'll mean something to you. You know, it's like you look at a CBC and you go RDW. What's the heck's an RDW? You know, red blood cell width. You know, it's like you don't even know what it is. It's on the result sheet. But does that relate to me? That with osteoporosis, you have no idea. Go to my book and look it up, and then it'll tell you what that number means and if it's something to be worried about.
Yeah, the other thing, I mean, the truth is we need to be educated and we need to look at things ourselves. It's unfortunate that's the case, but oftentimes just your general practitioner or even they just and this is what happens. Am I right? They really, you know,
I I
they
I had a patient today, and she's 38. She has osteoporosis, really bad osteoporosis, and I went through her labs, and I said, "Wow, your hematocrit is right at the borderline low." It was normal, but it was, like, right at the edge. Her hemoglobin, same thing. Her ferritin was too low. Her red blood cell count was a 3.8. I mean, all these things were wrong. So I said to her, I said, "What did your doctor say about these?" "Oh, he didn't mention that." And I'm going, "Really?" So yeah, you have to be your own best advocate. Look at these labs. And if things are not only if they're wrong, if they're too high or too low, you should have questions about it. But if you consistently, like on this woman, her hematocrit and hemoglobin were like on the exact lowest number they could be and be within the normal range, but they were very, very low. Um, you need to ask about that.
that's such a good point because oftentimes people will look at the lab, and if it's not in the red, they just skim through. Oh, it's fine. But unfortunately, those ranges are often way too large and they're not really in the functional optimal range. I know you've talked about that before. That am I right about that?
Yeah. So you have to realize that those rangers encompass people that they're not maybe sick with the disease, but they're not in optimal health either. So um, serum calcium, the ranges is 8.7 to 10.3 or 10.4. Well, if you have a 10.3 all the time, which is a normal range, That's the big flag that you might have a parathyroid issue. If you have an 8.7, 8.8 all the time, which is right at the low end, yeah, it's normal, but you're not absorbing calcium, you know? So both of those cases, there's a problem there, but they're normal, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting in the very first summit, and I haven't heard because the last one wasn't that long ago, but I think 20 people found out that they had needed parathyroid surgery, that they had, a parathyroid tumor and had surgery because their numbers were normal, but they were over 10 and they didn't realize it was missed. And so they had listened to Dr. Diva Boone, a parathyroid surgeon. So yeah, you need to, just like you said, but that's why I love the book because people can go and they can and really look at the values. All right, Dr. McCormick. So I'm just gonna fill you in, and I'd love your opinion on this case. The person that I had given you before who sent me, her CTX, not someone that I'm working with individually, but she had just was curious what this CTX meant because after, as I said, she heard you speak on the summit and had her doctor order it, and the doctor really didn't understand. So you're saying there's a discrepancy between the CTX and the
Right.
NTX. But let me give you a couple other things. So her DEXA test in 2020, and this is when she's been on Prolia, and then she went on reclass before the drug holiday. So it was minus 2.1, hip was minus, the spine minus 2.1, hip was minus 1.3, and the femoral neck was minus 2.2. And as I said, she was on Prolia since 2016, getting it every 6 months. And then the last Prolia was in 2020, and then she had reclassed in October 2020. So then after the drug holiday, her her, her last DEXA test, July 2022, was spine minus 2.7, hip minus 1.5, and femoral neck minus 2.6. So they put her back on reclass, not back on reclass, I'm sorry, they put her back on Prolia, and she had a Prolia in November 2022, and she's scheduled for the next one in June 2023. So what's your thought about that treatment?
How old is this patient?
Patient is 64.
So young. And she's been, you said, 5 years on Fosamax, 4 years on Prolia,
Yeah.
2 years essentially on reclass, and now once again on another year of Prolia.
Now she
So
also is a cancer she had major chemo, I don't know how many years ago, like 5 years ago, for cancer treatment, but that's the past. Yeah, so she's had a lot of things happening.
a lot of trauma to those bones. And, you know, I look at that as probably poor bone quality now after all that. And so, yeah, her bone density doesn't look bad, but she's a perfect candidate to get a TBS
Yeah,
on.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
Let's look at her bone quality because, you said that her current CTX is a 130 or so, 127, uh, which isn't bad. She's not losing bone with that. There's nothing wrong there. There's osteoclasts are doing something, so that's good. I would definitely get a P1NP on her, see where that is. But why, why do anything at this moment? You know, are you doing something now because the most recent bone density went from 2 points, went to 2.7 on the spine? What was it before?
It was 2.1 2 years ago, and the hip went from minus 1.3 to minus 1.5, so not
That's nothing.
yeah,
And the hip neck went from what to what?
I have to go look at that again, let me check. That was at let me see. Hang on 1 second, I will get that. That was from
So the
pull it I just have to pull it up again. Okay, the neck went from
2.2 to 2.6.
2.6 to 2.2, right, 2.2 to 2.6 in 2 years, yeah.
Oh, barely statistically significant loss in that hip neck, if anything. So, did she really lose in her spine? Probably. Did she really lose in her hip? Maybe a teeny bit, not much. But, um, I don't know why she would have lost point. 126 in her spine if her CTX is a 128. She shouldn't have. So what I think of when I look at that is I'm going to look at those two bone densities with a really critical eye and say, is there really that much of a loss? I don't believe it. So not with a 127. And you have to realize that that's a 127 CTX today. Well, a year ago, that CTX was even lower because the reclass was, had just been given, so it was making a bigger impact. It's starting to wear off now. The CTX might be raising a little bit. She shouldn't have lost point 0.6 on their spine. So I look at that as say, might not be accurate completely.
Oh,
And
so very interesting. Yeah.
and I also say, "Hey, she's a 127 CTX. Let her let her bones regenerate a little bit. Let them get healthy. Let's look at that P1NP. If that P1NP is way down at 15 or 20 or 22 or something like that, that's not good. So I think she's been on these bisphosphonates and Prolia for 10, 11, 12 years. That's a lot of not healthy. So let's let them regain a little bit of their activity level. And she's not going to be losing bone and at this point. So look more close at those at the bone density.
All right. Well, thank you. I think that just illustrates how complex this is and how we need to look at so many different factors. It's funny because she sent, just briefly, just sent some things to me and she really could up her exercise, the supplements. Like there's so many other things also in the arsenal, but to see what's going on. And I think it's interesting because you really go in detail in your book about the problems with the DEXA and how the placement could be incorrect and how, not everybody is trained and how if the leg isn't rotated the right amount, it can be inaccurate. So I think, I think that's a very important point that you brought up. So, yeah, so this is just so helpful. And well, tell everybody, because I know I've been sending lots of people your way because, you work with people's doctors and you help people sort of delve in and see what's going on. So, you want to just share what's available to people if they do want to really take a deeper dive into their situation?
I work with a lot of people from all over the world, and they send me their information, their lab tests, their bone densities, not just their scores, but their printout, the bone density printout, so I can see if the bone density was done properly, see if it makes sense at all. And like your example just now, that case, something doesn't make sense in several different aspects. So I would kind of tease that out and see what's going on there. But then we go through and say, okay, what can we do for this person to improve their overall health, nutritionally, dietarily, um, supplemental wise, and also if a medication is involved, then I explain to them the different medications and what's available, and then they talk to their medical doctor. And a lot of times, it's good or bad. I don't know which this is, but a lot of times, a medical doctor is just going to say, "Hey, patient, what do you want?" And which I think is kind of interesting. But I think that just goes to show that a lot of times the MD doesn't quite know, you know, why and when to use a certain drug. And as we've already saying all night tonight, it's really important to figure out which medication is proper. So I kind of try to educate people what the medications are. I can't prescribe medications, so I'm not involved in that part. But what I can do is educate people into what medications do, when they're better for this or better for that, and if indeed a medication is even warranted, and a lot of people don't want to do a medication, but they come to me with really, really severe osteoporosis of negative 4.5 and a fracture, and they don't want to do a medication. Well, I I explain to them why maybe in that case it really is important. And I think that um, what's important to understand is the medications, even though they have a lot of adverse effects, oftentimes they're not to be feared. They're to be understood for what they are, their benefits and their pros and their cons. And I think if you use them right, they can be really good for you. If you use them improperly, they're not good. So, I go through all that with people.
Yeah, and you did such a great job to really we delved into that in the last time you were on the podcast, really going through the medical because I think what happens after the first summit, and I'm all about natural approaches to osteoporosis. I mean, nutrition, exercise, root cause, just like I know you are. So that's always my first line of defense. But then there were people, just like you said, who had minus 4.5 and, where people had fractures and they wanted to really help themselves naturally, but you have to be realistic. Nobody wants another fracture. Nobody wants a fracture. And at the end of the day, that's what we have to do if we're going to keep our quality of life and, really and in those situations, as you say, and then, you do the medication can be necessary. And so and really be a wonderful adjunct to use until you figure out what's going on and to get person like you had to do yourself. So I think the key I wanted to really get across today is the numbers, how we can use both the CTX, the P1MP. People can use your book as a guide. They can listen. They have the numbers and that this is just so valuable and it's going to make such a difference. We're not going to be in addition to the other testing, but I just really, I'm so glad that you joined me tonight and really shed light on this and how we can use these bone turnover markers. Is there anything else you want to say? I know we could talk for hours. You are such a wealth of information, and I've learned so much from you, from your book. It's just really terrific.
Well, I'd just like to say that, the bone turnover markers are just one part of it. And you really do have to look at other lab tests and the bone density and maybe a TBS, and you try to put all that all together. And it's hard, it's complicated. And, but I think, if you would pick through my book and see the different labs and how are related a lot of times, then a person can go to their medical doctor and have a better conversation. That's really what my book is about, is to try to enlighten people and have them be able to carry on a better conversation with their physician.
You know what I like also so much is that it's research based. Your whole book is research based and studies. And so we're not saying, you're not just giving anecdotal information. This is research based. These are studies that show things. And so, and I think doctors are receptive to it. I think a lot of them just haven't had that kind of education and didn't know it was possible. So I really don't fault them because it's
I
not with the
I
they mean well. This is what I truly believe, but they've been educated. You have minus 2.5 on your DEXA, you go on a medication, and that's their education. So that's
totally agree with you. It's just not in their background. Really, they really only know that, we should check that vitamin D and that's about it. But there is more to it. And I think when they find that out, they're going to immerse themselves and they're going to say, wow, there's a whole world here that I didn't realize. Now, now I can really help somebody. So yeah,
yeah.
I'm hoping it's eye opening, not just to physicians, not to just to patients, but to physicians too.
Oh, I think it will be. I can only it's so exciting though to me, you write a book and it's gonna change lives all over the world. That's what I believe because it's that good of a book, and look, my husband's an OBGYN. He listened to your talk on the summit and it's like, "Oh, I didn't realize this, about that." And so, it shed light on to him. So I do think when they hear and they see the research behind it, it makes a lot of sense. So thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate everything that you do and for, really delving into this so people can have more information to really do the best that they possibly can. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dr. McCormick as much as I did, and now have a better understanding of bone turnover markers and how they can be so helpful in figuring out what's going on with your bones and what would be the best treatment. All the links that we talked about, including the link to Dr. McCormick's book, as well as how to get in touch with him, will be in the show notes. And what I have in honor of May, Osteoporosis Month, I have a hands-out, which is a little mini course on improve your bone health naturally. So it has a 40-minute class I did, really talking about nutrition and exercise, stress reduction, and just what things that you can get started, how to start on your path. And there's also posture exercises, which are so important that when you're exercising, you're in good posture. So it's a handout, it's free, it's just something that you can get also in the show notes. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.